Hello and welcome to this third in this series of 5 Easter questions. My name's Philip Wells. I work for Calvary Church here in the middle of Brighton, and I'm answering 5 questions that I would love to have asked. Maybe they're questions that you have in your mind. So since you ask these questions, number 1, what actually is Christian faith? Easter is a Christian festival. What actually is Christianity about? Second question, Easter fact. There are claims about Christ rising from the dead. Are they believable? And the third question that we're going to look at today is Easter hope. Is it good? Looking at the goodness, the worthiness of Christian faith. So what is this Easter hope that we're going to talk about for these next few minutes? Well, basically that Jesus Christ came down to earth from heaven as the Son of God, that he died on the cross as a sacrifice for sin and was raised from the dead supernaturally with a physical body. Christian faith then goes on to say that he ascended into heaven and so on. So the Apostle Paul summarises that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared and various people saw him. That's how Paul summarises the Christian message, and that's the hope that I'm going to be having in the background for these next few minutes. And in the past, Christian faith, I think, would have been thought of as good, but either perhaps not attainable or just mostly harmless. If you ever watch Call the Midwife, you'll see the vicar on Call the Midwife is sort of good and worthy and mostly harmless. But nowadays, particularly in a place like Brighton, I think Christianity risks being thought of as suspect and something to be avoided and something to be suspicious of. So that's my question. Is it good? Easter hope, is it good? And there are so many reasons why people might doubt the goodness of Christianity, and good reasons. So there's the scandal of child abuse, historic child abuse in national churches. It certainly rocked the faith of Roman Catholic people in Ireland and done the same, I guess, all over the world. But the scandal of child abuse done by people who claim to be Christians. The thought that the Christian church is a centre of greed and corruption. So the perception of large church systems being very wealthy and thus being greedy and corrupt. And you get the same thing at the other end of the cultural scale with the North American TV evangelists who, as far as we can see it over here in the UK, seem to be trying to make a buck out of people who really can't afford it. So corruption. And then if you're a person with a view of history, you might be tempted to look back at the history of Christian mission and its links or not with the idea of colonialism. And you might be thinking, well, that was all wrong because it was really an expression of cultural superiority, which was wrong. And nowadays we would perhaps call it racist. And then we could add to this list the perception of faith as being anti-science. Mind you, that neatly avoids the fact that some of the classic Western scientists like Kepler and Newton were believers, and that was their motivation for doing science. And then again, coming up to date, the perception that traditional / Christian sexual ethics, definition of marriage, expectations of celibacy apart from within marriage, things like that, would be seen as oppressive to human flourishing, etc., etc. So a lot of objections to say Christianity isn't good. But just before we go any further, let's notice that this critique in itself says that there is such a thing as morality, and it says that there is such a thing as good and bad, and that there is such a thing as truth, and all these things are important. And I'll just point out that the idea of good and bad, well, that certainly doesn't come from evolution, does it? Where does good and bad come from that we are using to assess Christianity here? Anyway, I'll pass on from that point. So how can I answer those points briefly? Well, I'm going to have a go, but how to do it? Let me just say what I'm not trying to do. I'm not trying to claim for Christian faith that all believers are perfect. Far from it. Every true Christian believer knows the reality of his and her sin, which will be with us all the way through this life until we go to heaven. It's more a claim that Christians know they're sinful but have a place to go for forgiveness, and that in itself is very significant, isn't it? And it's not a claim that all prophets are true. So in religion you have this idea of a false prophet, and certainly Christian religion itself asserts that there will be false prophets. Jesus himself said, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven." So there are false prophets. So let me try and give 3 very brief answers to the question, is it good? So the first one is a logical answer, and it simply says that the presence of fake Christian faith does not logically mean that the real thing doesn't exist. So if there are fake £50 notes, doesn't mean that we stop using money, does it? The existence of fakes doesn't mean that there's no real thing. Second, very quick answer on the level of sort of anecdotal level, that it's not uncommon for people to say, well, I've heard it on the television and I have this idea that people of strong Christian faith are hypocrites and they are suspect and I don't want to have anything to do with them, except the 1 or 2 people of Christian faith that I have actually met, and there's something quite impressive about them, something quite noticeably good and kind and useful. So that's a sort of anecdotal answer. There are real believing people, maybe you've met them. And my third answer is just to take a look at the nerve centre of Christian faith, if you like, look at the very heart of the DNA of Christian faith, which is this. It's about a Christ who, according to the gospel, the good news of Christ, came from heaven to earth to become a man, a human, in this case a male human. And this certainly shows the value of humanness, the value to God of humanness, of human nature, and as Christians would say, as human beings, as being in the image of God, and therefore immensely precious to God. And the fact that Christ became one endorses that very, very powerfully. Second thing here in the DNA of Christian faith is it is about a Christ who died upon a cross as a sacrifice. He gave his life, not for his own gain, but for the benefit of others. And here is something generous and sacrificial towards people. And it's the very opposite of greed. It's the very opposite of corruption. It's the very opposite of exploitation. It is, if it is to be believed, an act of extraordinary generosity and self-giving. And thirdly, the Christian, at the heart of Christianity, is a Christ who rose from the dead, something supernatural. And here's something that's not tied to the limitations of human moral achievement or moral failure, but here is something of the breaking in of the powers of heaven, and something that I would say here is glorious, and rightly described as glorious. So is it good? Well, I'm going to say that rightly understood, Christianity is not only good, but beautiful and glorious beyond any other goodness that there is in this world. And that's my answer to the question. Thank you for your attention. I invite you to look at the next one, which is it necessary? We're going to look at the necessity of Christian faith. And please feel free to tune into our online services over Easter and indeed all the rest of the year too. Thanks again. Bye.